What's up, guys? Welcome back. This is episode 35. I've got a good friend of mine. Um, he's considered to be a leader in the community. He has been running teams and doing wholesaling for a while now. My buddy Mike Jackson. Mike, I first found out about you and with your partner Don Walker through the Elephant Challenge, and I think that was where we met. So why don't you kind of kick us off and tell us like how did you get into real estate, kind of how you got here, what you're doing now?
Yeah, happy to do that. Before I do that, when you said my name, you rolled your eyes in a way that I wonder if you're like, oh man, I had to fill this spot with Mike Jackson today. But anyway, I'm happy that I'm here. So thank you so much for having me. Um, I've been in real estate for a long time. When I graduated school in 2005, my first job out was with Marcus and Millichap, where I was focusing on selling large multifamily apartment complexes. And what I realized really quickly is that I did not love going to the office every single day, dressed up in a suit. It felt like a tuxedo at the time because I'm not a formal kind of guy in any way. But suit and tie every day to the office to make cold calls was not something that I really enjoyed. And so I learned a lot in my few years that I worked there. And then I went from there into private equity, and I worked for a hedge fund, and then I ultimately worked for, which I sort of still do. I help run a family business that does training for HR professionals. Um, the beauty of that business is that I don't have to spend 100% of my time on it, and I can work on other things, my passions, which is real estate. And so I joined SubTo in May of 2020. I think I was number 300 and something. I wish I was number seven like Uncle Lanza. I'm not, but I do remember very well the meetings that we used to have with Pace, where there were four or five or seven of us in a meeting with Pace for 2 or 3 hours, and that was pretty freaking awesome. But I was lucky enough to meet my partner Don Walker in SubTo during an Elephant Challenge, and I probably dragged her kicking and screaming to create a creative wholesaling business with me. And ever since, we've just been focusing on negotiating on market low equity deals and then either keeping them, preferably, or selling them to community members.
Yeah, so is that how you guys got started with that strategy? Was through the challenges by doing DTA low equity? I know
Yeah.
you taught the semester on low equity.
Yeah. So before I joined Sub2, what I was doing was direct to agent work. And I was really focusing on just cash wholesale transactions. And so my business model was just I want every single agent in a market to know who I am and what I'm looking for, and then bring me the deals that you are either having trouble selling or that maybe you just don't want to put on the market for one reason or another. And so I was focusing on wholesaling those deals from a cash standpoint. When I joined Sub2, this whole creative world opened up to me, and Pace made it sound so much simpler than what I previously thought it was. And when Don and I met during one of the first elephant challenges, I realized really quickly that the community needed somebody to kind of hold their hand through the process of doing their first deal. That was the whole emphasis on the challenge itself. However, it was more evident the more you get to know people who aren't a part of Sub2 but want to become a part of Sub2. And that challenge is really designed for that type of demographic. It was the people who were in the free group, free Facebook group, the creative group, and then eventually they would join Sub2. But we, during the process of trying to figure out how to best help, what we realize is that if we can give people very niche, highly targeted data, if we teach them how to make a phone call and just generate some interest, then we would back them up and try to close the deal. And so, with my history before joining Sub2 of doing direct to agent, I thought that that was a really good transition for us at the time. Luckily, it turned out that way. And so we've been wholesaling creative deals ever since. So it's been about 2.5 years since the first one we've ever done together in the Elephant Challenge.
Talk about what you just said there. You said like highly targeted data. What does that look like for most people, right? Like what kind of lists are you stacking and how are you coming up with that?
So for low equity for us, what was happening, we had to adjust this a little bit. We had 200 to 300 plus people on our Zooms every single time we did them, and we did three a week for 3 hours apiece. And so we needed to supply a lot of data. It wasn't as if I could pull data. I live in Austin. It wasn't as if I could supply Houston data, for example, and that would provide us with enough lead opportunity. So what I basically did is I created filters in PropStream where I would search for 15% or less equity on market. I don't care if it's been on market for a day or 1,000 days. I want that as part of my list. But this was also back 2 years ago. And this was kind of before everybody was doing on market low equity. So I could go super wide. We did deals everywhere from Washington to Florida and everywhere in between. Now that created some challenges. But back to the original question of the niche data. So we basically just take on market for sale, active, 15% or less equity, and that we kind of filtered out a little bit more based on the interest rate that PropStream has for the underlying mortgages. So, for example, we'll go up to 5.5% if there's 10% or less equity. We will bump that equity position up to 15% if the interest rates are lower. So that's the data that we focus on. And what we're really into is the business of creating relationships with agents. We never want to force anybody to do anything. We don't want to be the person on the other side of the phone who's saying, you're an idiot for not considering something like this. We try to lead with value and say, look, if you guys do decide to go this route, we're here to advise, whether you work with us or not. And if you don't, let me show you exactly how we would structure it so that it makes sense for you. You get paid your commission, but more importantly, how can we best protect the seller so that in 6 months from now, payments are continuing to be made and it's not affecting the seller's credit?
So why don't you talk to us a little bit about that? Like, how are you building those relationships with agents? That's the common complaint. We've all heard it in the community that they're know-it-alls, they're standoffish, they're hesitant, if not outright ignorant. So what are the few things that you're doing to kind of build that rapport right away, besides leading with value? Or how do you lead with value, I suppose, would be the real question.
You know, I'm going to answer your question a couple different ways, but what I've learned is that my initial reaction to agents when I started to pitch creative was, why
Hmm.
isn't this agent more interested in this option? Right? Or why don't they understand this the way that I do? And largely it's just because they haven't been exposed to it, right? Before a few years ago, before Pace really came on the scene, creative was a thing, but it wasn't really a thing the way it currently is, right?
Hmm.
And so it's just lack of exposure that agents had to it. So what do we do typically when we don't know something? If we're presented with an opportunity and we don't really know about it, what's our response? It's usually no, right? Because it's easy. It's like you walk
Hmm.
into a store, can I help you? Even if I do need help, my first reaction is please just get away from me, right? And so we spent a lot of time teaching agents and their brokers about the benefits of it. But what I realized too is that agents have gotten a little bit spicier now. After you talk to, like, Adam, how many times, for example, have you called an agent for a deal that's on market and they pick up the phone and they go, if this is creative, a creative offer, I don't want to talk to you. Something to that effect. How many times have you experienced that?
I don't usually call the agents, but I've experienced that with actually with a broker for an RV park that we were trying to get financials on to do an underwrite. Kind of similarly, like, well, who are you? What's your, you said you represent investors. Like, who's your firm? Like, what do you do? I'm not putting the work together to put all these financials just to send it to some random person, some stranger on the other end of the phone.
Right. Right. And I think that's really common, right? Especially when it comes to more of the commercial type of deals where you're actually taking a look at T12s and rent rolls and all of these sorts of things. If I'm analyzing a commercial deal, something that has lots of income generated, I need to take a look at the
Mhm.
income and the expenses, right? That's mandatory for me. When it comes to selling or buying a single family home, typically agents have got off really easy in the past couple decades where all they have to do is put a property on the market on the MLS and maybe talk to a couple people, and people will show up to an open house and it'll sell pretty quickly. And a lot of the agents that we were working with a couple years ago were even more spoiled because, pre-COVID, all they had to do was put it on the MLS, hold an open house. The property was probably going to sell within a week over list price. And depending on where you are, there's probably a really attractive cash offer in there too. And so, when we started calling about creative deals, agents were in a position where they're like, why am I even considering something like this? But then you fast forward 30 or 45 days later, after the property's been on the market, they haven't gotten the offers, or they've gotten offers that are lower than what they could accept, and they don't have a solution because the sellers owe more than what ideally they would in this situation, right? They're having to pay at close. And so, kind of going back to the original question here, the what I've run into with agents a lot, especially more recently now, is that there's so many people calling on low equity on market opportunities. And I know I'm part of the problem. I'm one of them who's calling. I've taught people to call through SubTo and the semester and that sort of thing. Also the Elephant Challenge. But I think that agents are rightfully getting upset at people like us calling because we're mistreating them, because we're not treating them with respect, because maybe we're speaking down to them. And it may not even be intentional, right? But it's sort of like, why don't you know this? And I do, kind of thing. And I had one experience, I've had this experience a few times, but I was selling a deal that we bought. We closed on it. We were trying to rent it out. We ended up selling it on a wrap. But when I listed it with an agent, this was a California deal. I can't tell you how many phone calls I got from my agent saying, "Hey, you need to talk to this person. They want to present you with a creative offer. I don't know what I'm doing. Can you talk to them?" Now, one thing that they didn't recognize is that, or they didn't know this, they didn't know that I was in SubTo and that I actually knew what I was like. I'd been through a transaction before, right? It's not my first rodeo.
Mhm.
And so what would happen is these investors would just rattle off everything that they've heard about SubTo. Some of it is completely off base, some of it was accurate. But I would ask very basic questions to kind of probe, right? I'd kind of see where they were at with their experience. It very quickly showed me that these people have either never done a deal or that they've watched just lots of YouTube.
Mm.
And I think that agents are hearing more and more of that recently, and rightfully so. As I mentioned before, they're getting frustrated. And what I've learned to do is provide as much value as I possibly can on the front end. So, for example, this is like the longest winded way of answering your question. I apologize. But um, so the data that I pull is a little bit different than PropStream data. It's similar, but I get it way before. So PropStream is an aggregator of data. They get their data probably day 10 to 20 or so, depending on where they're pulling it from. And so you're not going to get day one data on PropStream. But I figured out a way to get day one data. And so the conversations that I'm having with agents are very, very different than the conversations that people are having 2 weeks after it's been on market. My conversation is very simple. It is, hey, Robert, my name is Mike. You probably have no interest in the offer that we're presenting. However, because I've identified your property as something that would fit our buy box, meaning that it's a low equity, it might be tough for the seller to close this based on their equity position. I think that I'm probably the first of 100 phone calls you're going to get in the next couple of weeks. So basically, even if you don't work with me on this, I would encourage you to structure it a couple of different ways should you choose to go down the path of doing something creative. And I have a list of 4 or 5 different things that I make sure I include to communicate to the agent and say, look, this really may not be a good solution for your seller. But if it is, and if I were in the seller's shoes, this is exactly how I would want it structured to best protect myself. And please take this advice if you guys decide to go down this route. I'm available to answer any questions that you have, whether you choose to work with us or not. So, what I really want to do is lead with as much value, assuming that the agent has never done a creative transaction before. And I'll ask them, hey, have you ever done a transaction like this? Or has someone in your office ever done a transaction like this? Many of the agents who we work with have never gone through this experience before. You kind of normalize it for them. And so those are largely the conversations that I'm having with agents. It's never, you're an idiot for not considering something like this. It's more of, hey, I totally understand if you don't understand this process. Let me explain to you how it could benefit your seller. But just as importantly, let me tell you the downsides. Because just as with any other transaction, it's it's very rarely a seamless transaction, and it's very rarely one where there is no downside. But let me show you how I can protect you. So those are the kinds of conversations I'm having.
Yeah, so you really are going very heavy into the educational piece, it sounds like, which, like you said, most people are not. They're talking down to the agents. They're making ridiculous offers. A buddy of mine who's a local realtor got an offer the other day for like a 0.75% interest rate or something on a creative deal. And he was like, I'm not even gonna present this to my seller. Like, you're out of your mind. Um,
Now, there's a
so
way to do that though, effectively, right? If you really understand what's going on in the scenario, if you're trying to find a way to make sure that the agent wins and the seller wins, maybe there's a way that you can structure something like that. But to lead with something where you go, it's sort of like as an agent. Are you an agent, Adam?
no.
Okay. Have you ever talked to an agent and they say something like, "This property's been on the market for 10 days and I've gotten 10 offers at 50% of the asking price." Cash
Yeah.
offers, but that's really common, right? And a lot of people I think take the easy way out and just send something. It's like, who's going to bite on this? I'd rather not call, so let me send an email or a text. And something that is way off base, like a 50% loan to ask price, for example, or a 0.75% interest rate, those feel really off base to me without knowing the situation and if that really does help the seller. So I think the moral of my business is that if I can take the time to learn about the situation a little bit. Now, here's the thing is that a lot of agents aren't going to tell me what's going on and they don't have to. It's none of my business.
Mhm.
However, it does help me structure deals. So if I can pivot it as, hey, look, if I can provide to you guys a solution that works for everybody, and Mr. and Mrs. Agent, you get paid your commission, are you guys open to having a conversation about something that is a little bit non traditional, maybe a little bit unconventional? And typically the answer is sure, let's try to find a way to make this work. It depends on a lot of factors. But I think largely you really have to create a relationship with people in this business before they trust you enough, especially to take over their mortgage that they've taken out for themselves and are responsible for. So I would encourage everyone just to slow down, take a big step back, follow up. I've never closed a deal on the first call ever. Shoot, I probably never closed a deal on the first 10 calls. But if you give yourself time and you can kind of massage the transaction, the agent, the seller a little bit, I think if you can educate the whole time, you're good.
I did think that's a really good point. And kind of to your point earlier, one of the things my former regional leader told us is like, now there's 14,000, 15,000 people in SubTo. Needless to say, not all of those people even fully understand and grasp the concepts and know what they're doing. Now, when you take that and you consider that the free creative group has 144,000 people and Pace gets millions of views on his YouTube, like you said, these poor agents are probably getting bombarded with Lord only knows what. So, like you said, I think it's important that you come in and you lead with value and you treat them with a lot of respect and assume that they do know what they're talking about. And if
And
not, assume that you can help them.
largely they do. Even if a seller or even if an agent has never done a creative transaction, they know what owner finance is. And that's all that we're doing is an owner finance, a seller finance transaction. Now, there's going to be some wiggle room there for different types of structures, but basically, if you can say something like, we offer seller financing, and we offer it in a way that's beneficial, hopefully, for everyone involved. And if it's not, then it's just not a really great fit for us to engage in this transaction. But I think if you simplify it as much as you possibly can, it's much more beneficial to the agents. But, have you ever had a conversation with somebody and in the first 5 seconds, you can tell that it's not going to go the way that you want it to go? Or based on what the other person has said, you're like apprehensive to work with this person. You think maybe they're not professional. Maybe they've said something that comes off as unprofessional. Has that ever happened to you, Adam?
Oh, thousands of times. It's
Yeah.
part of being a small business owner.
100%. 100%. And you were mentioning the numbers, 144,000 the creative group, 15,000 or so in the SubTo group. Many of us in SubTo, everyone here is professional and knows what they're talking about. But there are a lot of people who people call. Has someone ever called you buddy? Hey, buddy, but you don't really know them. You're like, hey, we're not.
Yeah.
I don't know you. Or hey, friend.
Yeah,
That
we're
that
not on we're not on that level, I think, is like you're saying.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet. Um, those sorts of things always throw me off. And then typically, what I run into a lot, especially when I'm selling our own deals, and people don't know that I know creative finance, what they try to do is throw these big words at me, or what they think are big words. And you're not showing off. In fact, you're making it more complicated for people. The idea is to really simplify this as much as possible. And the only way that I've found to do that properly is by actually getting to know the agent, and if you can, the seller. And so that's what I focus on. Is just I'm going to spend more time than a lot of people on it, but I'm going to build a stronger relationship than a lot of other people as well.
Well, and to your point of confusion, one of the things I learned from Dan Kennedy is a confused mind always says no.
Always, always.
Because, like you said in the beginning, it's the easiest path. It's the path of least resistance. Even if I do need help, even if I could be homeless next week, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah, it's sort of like asking the question of, you kind of give your little pitch, and I say, Adam, would you be opposed to us continuing this conversation? You're asking for the no, right? Because it's easy for people to say no.
Hmm.
I think with anything creative, just because it is different than what most people are used to, you're going to run into that immediate apprehension or just a straight out no. And if you can, for at least the method that we've chosen, the on market low equity, if you can understand that it takes time, and agents are going to want to know your track record, right? They're going to want to speak to people you've done deals with before. They should, at least. They're going to want to make sure that you have an email address that isn't an at gmail.com, for example. Spend the extra $7 a month and do things like that at least make yourself look a little bit more professional than others. Um, but I think that there are ways that we can take advantage of, what's the best way to say it? I think that there are ways that we can separate ourselves from others. And the best way that I've found is just being as upfront and transparent and honest as you possibly can be. And then, tell people, I'll tell agents all the time, look, this probably isn't a good fit for you. In fact, what we're about to talk about may not make any sense for you or for the seller. But if you guys do get to the point where you consider it, I would love for you to consider us as an option. And so I've never really, I tell people this all the time, I've never ever sold or closed a subject to deal, a creative deal, ever. What I've done is I've provided hopefully value. I think it's value. Hopefully they find it valuable too. And they just come back to me asking me questions. Hey, I got this other offer. Would you consider something like this? Or, um, I got this other offer. Can you take a look at it to see if it's all lined up correctly? And if I lead with honesty and transparency and say something like, this is a fantastic offer, I know this person who is sending you this offer and I trust them, that's going to bring me a lot of points in the future. And so what I'm really trying to do is make sure that I build a relationship for this deal that we're working on today, but more importantly for deals that hopefully we can work on in the future. And I almost assume that I'm not going to get this deal at all, but I want to get every single other deal that you're going to have where you're having trouble selling it, or you need someone like me who might know how to do these types of transactions a little bit better than you, just because you don't have the experience.
Yeah, well, I also think honesty and transparency are probably just baked into you at this point, like calling me out in intro.
Well, that was a joke more than anything.
I know.
But I think that honesty and transparency is something that is easy to forget about because just like you said earlier, the path of least resistance is always what people are going to choose to go down first, right? And I'll give you an example. I don't think that if I had to choose, I would never wholesale another subject to deal ever in my life. I would never do it. I would be buying them if it made sense for me, or I would be passing on it if it didn't make sense for me to buy. Now, the reason for that is because I think that a lot of wholesalers who are doing subject to deals, seller finance and sub twos, aren't leading with complete transparency at the beginning. For example, it'll be like, hey, Adam, my name is Mike. I'm interested in buying your house at 123 Main Street.
Mhm.
Now, if I'm looking to wholesale it and I tell you that I'm interested in buying it, aren't those really aren't congruent, right? I'm telling you that I want to buy it, but I'm realistically going to sell it to somebody else.
Yeah, you're gonna put me on an assignable contract, which could potentially fall through, and I'm not aware of it.
And I think with creative, I think even more importantly, if I'm buying your house, Adam, and I'm going to wholesale it, or let's say I get it under contract, I'm going to wholesale it. And if I don't introduce you to the person who's ultimately going to be responsible for making the payments on the mortgage that you qualified for, as the wholesaler, connector, whatever you want to call me in the middle, I'm not doing my ethical duty to the seller, right? What I'm looking for is a five or $10,000 check at the end of the day, and hopefully no one's going to notice or call me back later. As opposed
Mhm.
to, hey, Adam, my partners and I are buying deals in this area. This is what we do. If we get to the point of a sale, I would love to introduce you to the person who's actually going to close on it. So you were more than comfortable with the person who's responsible for making those payments. And very few people who are calling these agents say that. Very few, because it's the hard conversation to have, right? It's so much easier just to say, yeah, I'll buy it. And then at closing, have someone else's name on that deal. Now
Mhm.
that puts me in trouble as the wholesaler, not because I'm not being honest, but because I'm the one who's built up that relationship with the seller or the agent. So if someone doesn't make that payment, the person who I sold it to doesn't make a payment, or things go sideways, who are you going to call as the agent or the seller?
Right, they're gonna call Mike.
Me, right? And what I will tell you is that so our average assignment fee on these types of deals is about 9,000 bucks. And after you take out expenses, I have a partner, so I split the deal, and then we have all these other expenses. It's not very much at the end of the day. I might be making 3 grand off a deal like that. It's
Mhm.
not worth it for me to be dishonest or for me to struggle sleeping at night because what happens if someone doesn't make a payment down the road? Trust me, it's not worth it.
Right,
And
3 grand
so,
is not life-changing money for really
no,
anybody.
no, no, it barely covers a mortgage payment. So, is it worth doing business unethically or in a way that is fuzzy, blurry, not transparent, for a few thousand bucks? And I would argue heavily, heavily no. So I, anytime I wholesale a deal now, and it's very rare that I do, by the way, but if I wholesale it, I want to know who's buying it. I want to know, are they capable of buying it? Have they bought a sub two deal before? If so, I want to talk to the people who they have bought it from to make sure the payments are up to date. I want to see if I can escrow payments, and I also want to see um I want to see money in the bank in case payments are missed. Where's the money coming from if a payment is missed? And I want to be extra careful for the agents and for the sellers that I talk to. So I know that's probably going two or three steps further than a lot of people go, but that's kind of the idea too, right? And that's part of the value that I would provide to an agent saying, if you choose to go this route, here are the 4 or 5 things that I would make sure are included in the deal structure to best protect the seller. And those are the things that I would include.
Yeah, because like you're saying, at least if the buyer is good and vetted, that mortgage will come off of the seller's name eventually. But you have to have a good buyer to make sure that nothing goes sideways. That person doesn't end up in some kind of sticky situation, stuck with the house, or in some kind of weird intermediary court battle.
And look, things happen. I think that we see a lot of, are you in Gator too, Adam?
No, I know a lot of Gators, so I hear almost everything through the grapevine.
Yeah. And so it, being a Gator or a lender is a tough position because I think that you have to go into every deal going, there are chances here that I might lose the money. And not because Mike is a bad person or Adam's a bad person, but because sometimes things go south. You know,
Hmm.
I was talking to a buddy of mine down here in Austin the other day, and he was telling me about he owns about 140 or so single family homes that he's bird, and he still has them in his inventory, and he's done that in a very short period of time. And I asked him, how did you do that? And he was telling me the story. The first two deals that he purchased, the first one was hit by a tornado in Austin, of all places. His house was like the one house hit by a tornado. For some reason, I thought that tornadoes only hit RV parks, but I guess that's not true. The
And cattle farms.
Yeah, that's right. The other house, the second one,
Mm.
burned down, and so his first two was hit. One was hit by a tornado. The other was burned down, and just the guts that he had to continue to say, okay, these sort of things happen, and to build up to 140 total units, that takes a lot of guts, right? Because if you're after two, 100% of your deals have gone south, not the way that you wanted. Now I know that I brought this up in the sense of private money lending, but I think that we hear all these stories about bad people or people have done things incorrectly. You can do things correctly and things happen.
Hmm.
And so, it's always nice to hear the story of someone who is sometimes being accused of doing something incorrect in a deal. Because usually, what do they say? Gosh, what do they say? It's like one person is telling the truth, the other person is telling the truth, but there's that gray area, that Venn diagram of truths that are kind of overlapping. And
Or there's
so,
three versions of stories, yours, mine, and the truth.
thank you. That's why I love you, because you're so much smarter than I am.
I
Um,
don't know about that.
well, I think that anytime money is changing hands on a deal, I think the assumption has to be that everyone's going to be doing their best until something happens. And the deals that we do, we try to bring in the best people possible. We try to, right? And we've learned to verify income. We've learned to verify bank statements and to check references and do all those sorts of things. Some people in the community are pulling credit reports to make sure that they can see exactly what's being paid on, what's not being paid on. And I think that the more people that are doing these sort of creative deals, I think those sorts of steps are going to be needed because I love doing these kinds of deals. I would argue that buying SubTo is the best way to acquire, especially if you want to do it in mass and put less down and get better interest rates than you would get at a conventional bank. But I want to make sure that we as SubTo students are doing our part to make sure that we protect the integrity of the transaction and that we aren't the ones who are screwing things up for others. We all want us all to lead with integrity, do the right things, protect sellers, protect agents, say the right things, and always be honest, even if it means that you're going to lose a deal. Because I like sleeping at night with my head on my pillow with no worries. Now, there are plenty of worries, by the way, but if I can eliminate some of the ones that are avoidable, I'm absolutely going to do that. And, that's really what I want to communicate across our community is how to do things safely and with integrity.
It sounds like too what you're saying is that the problem is a little bit both on the front end and in the acquisitions with people not being upfront and honest and transparent because that's a difficult thing, but also on the backside with the dispositions, not doing the extra work of vetting and qualifying, which is also by not doing right the path of least
Mhm.
resistance.
It's it's easy for me to get a property under contract. If you gave me 30 minutes, I can get a property under contract, no problem. But does it make sense for me to get that property under contract? Am I going to, does it make sense for me to buy it? Does it make sense for me to send it to you, Adam, and for you to buy it? Probably not if I can get it under contract in 30 minutes. It's the same thing with cash deals, right? If I sent a cash offer to an agent that's 95% of the asking price and it's cash, and I'm offering to pay agents commissions and closing costs and that sort of thing, the seller's probably going to take that. But why would I get that under contract? What's the point? I think
Hmm.
that anytime you present money into an exchange, people are going to do things unfortunately, naturally in an unethical way sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. And I think that the kind of numbers that we talk about in our communities, even though assignment fees for creative deals aren't crazy expensive, or it's not a massive windfall for anybody. I think that just because there's three or four, sometimes five zeros at the end, I think that it's going to attract people who are going to communicate ineffectively or from a dishonest standpoint. And I would much rather not do a deal than do a deal. Let me give you an example. We sold this deal. This was probably one of our first wholesale SubTo deals. It was a deal in San Antonio. And we sold it or we bought it from a family who was moving to Bulgaria or Hungary or something. It was a VA loan, really good loan. And we weren't having to pay the sellers a whole lot of money. I think it was like 2 grand. House was worth about 415 or so. So the entry fee was pretty good. I think we ended up making about $4,000 on that assignment fee. What we realized during the transaction is that there were so many hidden costs. There was like an HOA lien and there was a water softener lien. I mean, there are all these things that we just decided to pay for. And those all came out of our assignment fee because what we wanted to do was make sure that the number that we quoted our end buyer was the number that they were going to pay. Right. So we wanted to make sure we were doing right by that person. Long story short, after we continued to decrease our assignment fee all the way down to 4,000, I think I may have made $1,200 on that deal. The person who we sold it to, and again, we didn't have these systems in place that we do now, they didn't make a payment for 6 months. And then we started to get all these phone calls saying, hey, this property's in foreclosure. What is happening? Well, I don't know. I don't own it. And we did communicate to the seller. We did communicate to the agent that we were going to be selling this to a partner of ours. But because we were the one who created the relationship with both the seller and the agent, we were the ones who they came back to. Now, the person who we sold it to, just by conversation, we learned that they were supposed to be very well capitalized. It turns out that they were going to be borrowing money from a Gator, from a PMP or PML or something like that. And so that money fell through. So payments weren't made for 6 months. And at the end of the day, I am not going to be doing any deals with that agent anymore because who we sold it to, the person who we sold it to, did not honor their side of the transaction. So what we did is we took a really hard look at that. We paused our business for 2 weeks and we looked at what we did wrong. And we came up with all these other ideas of, okay, well, how do we prevent these sorts of things in the future? And communication first and foremost, right? To your question, basically, on the front end, if we communicate exactly what it is that we're doing and that there are no surprises on closing day, then we've done our part. If we've sold it to someone who's gone through our vetting process, basically it's sort of we're basically putting them through an RMLO process, except most of the time we're not pulling credit. But we can see whether they are capable financially of making payments. And if I pull a credit report, I'm going to see, are they actually making their payments? So if we've done our part there, all I want to do is be able to cross that off and say, I've done my part. Now it's up to things happening. Hopefully things happen the way that we're all hoping it will. Chances are it will, but I just want to make sure I do my part on both the front end and in the dispo side to make sure that we've at least put the seller in the best position possible.
I think to your point of like whether the activities around money can be ethical or unethical, one of the things that I picked up from Logan Bowers is that your actions will follow the incentives that are laid out. And so whatever the incentives are, right? Like in one of the things that we've heard popularly was like connectors making very flimsy connections. And it's like, well, that was what they were incentivized to do. They could make all this money with doing very little work, at least until it came back. That was the incentive. So they followed the incentive.
Yeah. And that's kind of my issue with the whole connector role. There, there are a lot of connectors that I've worked with and spoken with who do things the way that I think that they should do them. They're also, path of least resistance. Sometimes it's easy to say, hey, I got this person who has some money. Hey, I got this person who has a deal. Give me 1% of the total purchase price as a fee and I'll be happy. You know, you guys go ahead and take care of it. The good ones are actually monitoring the whole process to make sure that everyone's taken care of. But I don't think that the people who are involved in those sorts of transactions sometimes have the experience necessary to properly analyze it to see if it's a good deal for everyone. And people who join SubTo, for example, I feel like there's a little bit of a difference in demographic from the people who join SubTo versus the people who join Gator. And I think largely it's based on um, cost of entry, right? Gator's less expensive, SubTo's more. And I think that you typically get people who have real estate businesses in SubTo, whereas people who join Gator go, okay, cool, I can just do EMD deals and make a couple grand in a few days. So it's more of a, I think the way that they're understanding it is this is more of like a get rich quick kind of thing.
Hmm.
And they don't have the level of experience I think that on average more SubTo students do. And so, you know, dealing with someone who has experience, who has done a deal is very, very different than dealing with someone who hasn't. And, you know, during the Elephant Challenge, we would always tell people to never do your first deal without somebody helping you along the way, someone who's actually done a deal before. And it's not from a selfish standpoint of, hey, I want to make 50% of your deal or some percentage of it. What I personally would want to do is say, let me walk you through this, show you what the possible mishaps are, how you can avoid them, so that when you are ready to do them on your own, at least you've been through the process with somebody to help at least have another set of eyes on it. And what I realized really quickly with creative deals is that there's never been a SubTo deal, for example, that has been similar to any one that I've done before it. Every single SubTo deal is different. Thank God I have transaction coordinators who take care of these things or title people because I wouldn't have any idea what I'm looking for or how to fix some of the things that I'm experiencing for the first time. I'm lucky to have built my team to help me out with that. If my team can't help me out with that, I go to the community and someone in there can help me. But I've never experienced situations that are similar with SubTo deals. They're all very, very different. So I highly encourage anyone who is looking to do their first lending deal, creative deal. I would say cash is relatively simple, although make sure you're underwriting it correctly because you don't want to waste anyone's time. But anything that is that's a little bit different, work with somebody else. I can promise you it's worth paying someone a small fee to help get you through your first transaction or your first 10.
Agreed. And you mentioned the team. Let's talk about that a little bit because you said you met Dawn for the Elephant Challenge. How did that look? Like you kind of mentioned off recording, probably dragging her, kicking and screaming, which knowing Dawn, I could see that. Uh,
Don and I joke because she and I both joke that we're stuck with each other. I'll call her, I'll say, Don, you're stuck with me. And she'll say, you're stuck with me or whatever. Um, I realized really quickly that Dawn was someone who I needed to have as part of my circle of trust or whatever we're calling that circle of people around us who help us grow. She is highly, highly motivated, highly intelligent, both from a social aspect and just from a general book smart. She's brilliant. Um, but she complements me in a way that I need. I'm much more of, hey, let's just go run, do it, figure it out as we go. Dawn is gracious enough to give me enough rope to do those sorts of things, but also rein me back in when I've gone maybe a little bit too far or I've taken this tangent or taken the road down the wrong way. So bring me back in. And when we were getting to know each other in the Elephant Challenge, we were working on a regional leadership. I was one of the regional leaders. She was too. We're both in Texas. And I heard her run a couple of Zooms, and she was so professional. And the way that she interacted with people, people are drawn to her naturally in a way that they're not drawn to me. And I, I called her after she ran her first one, and I said, Dawn, I don't care what we do, but we're doing it together. And so I basically just said, look, I'm attaching myself to you. I'm sorry, but you're going to be my partner for the long term. And what we did for the first year is we did a lot of deals together. And I wanted to see how we would interact with each other. And what I realized is that she's fantastic in the areas that I am not, just fantastic. And so we complement each other really, really well. And she's not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. I won't let her. And I hope to do every single deal that I ever do in the future to be done with her. She's a family to me. She comes down and stays with us and she hangs out with my kids, and she's one of my wife's great friends. And so I was very, very lucky to find someone. But what I would encourage anyone to do if they're looking to pair up with someone is give it time and see how you guys do during a transaction. We've been through a lot of really, really stressful times, and you never really know who someone really is until you've been through something like that. So give yourself some time before you formalize any sort of relationship.
yeah, and so that kind of leads me to my next point. It was going to be a question, but you've kind of already addressed it to some degree, which is that like there's a level of intentionality there. Like you didn't just go find somebody off the street and you're like, guess what? You're stuck with me now. You're my partner. You really kind of like vetted Dawn out. You spent time with her, watched her Zooms, heard her, listened to how she speak, watched her in transactions before you cemented something.
When I met Dawn, Dawn had never done a real estate deal. I think she just joined SubTo, and I think it took her the next 6 to 8 months or so to do her first deal, which we did separately from each other. I helped her a lot, and she helped me on a lot of stuff I was working on. But we needed to see how we worked together before we were ultimately doing deals together. And yeah, I mean, it's rare that you find someone like Dawn. If anyone here has met Dawn, I know you have, Adam. She's a force, and she attracts people in a way that very few people do. And I hope that everyone has the chance to meet a partner just like I have with Dawn. Um, but yeah, I
She's
think
also
that
too humble to ever admit that too.
look, I created an Instagram page for Dawn because she wasn't posting, and the Instagram
I heard.
handle was the Dawn Walker Fan Club. And
I heard. It's awesome.
Yeah, and she deserves so much. Um, people who have done a deal with Dawn, people who get to hang around with Dawn, speak very, very highly of her after meeting with her, but she is never one to speak about, you know, any accomplishments that she has. She's very, very humble. Um, but yeah, I think that taking relationships, partnership relationships slowly is the best way. I knew that I wanted to pair up with Dawn right away, and I had to hold myself back from. I I think I used the I what did I tell her? I think I told her I went to Jared, or I'm going to put a ring on it or something like that. Formalizing the relationship. But I had to wait just to see how we did.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think patience is key when doing those sorts of things.
Okay, so yeah, because so at this point you've got Dawn, you've got a partner. What does it look like building a team? Like, you said y'all are in the Elephant Challenge now. So sounds like you're getting a whole bunch of newbies, but if I had to guess, probably not much other direction outside of that.
So building a team we found to be really challenging. It's it's never really the work that's the challenge in our business. It's always the management of the people. And we've brought some amazing people onto our team. Amazing. And I think that one thing that we realized, especially in the Elephant Challenge, because again, it was non-sub 2 people for the most part, we realized that it was difficult to coordinate people or help them coordinate themselves is probably the best way to say it. We would say, how much time do you have free in your day? And then we would create their own plan for them to work on moving deals forward. Meaning, if you have 2 hours in your day, I expect you to make this amount of calls. And it's not for the business's sake, it's really trying to push people in the direction that we know from experience works. You know, I don't know if you've ever done this, but I used to do this a lot. In fact, I still do. Where I have to call a seller or an agent if I have an appointment set up. In my head, what I want to do is I want to analyze the deal, right? I want to check out the numbers. I want to do some comping. I want to see pictures. I want to do all these sorts of things. And I think that's natural human behavior to want to figure everything out before you go into a conversation. Um, I've never found that that works ever. And it doesn't put me in a better position than not doing it does. And so, what we would do for these people is say, in 2 hours, I think you should be making 30 plus phone calls. You might get a hold of 5 people, maybe 10 people. But what I don't want you to do is spend too much time between phone calls. I want you to press call, call, call. And it's scary. If you don't have the training or the experience, for example, Adam, I'm kind of curious. Let's say that I give you a list of low equity deals. Let's say that you are calling. Okay.
Hmm.
We'll play out this hypothetical a little bit. Um, what's one fear that you might have as a brand new person calling an agent on a low equity deal?
Probably just the backlash, right? Like either whether it's just the harshness of the words that they use, like whether it's them saying, "Hey, you don't know what the hell you're talking about," or them just outright cursing you out.
Yeah, right. Because you're calling a so-called expert in real estate, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have experience, you're kind of putting yourself at a lower level than where they're at in terms of their experience. So that's one. Another one that I noticed to be really, really common is what happens if the call goes great and they say yes? What happens then? What's crazy is that that scares more people off than anything else that I've heard or experienced before. And so what we have to do with them is say, look, none of us are doing these sorts of things alone. If I brought on 10 baby elephants for our team and I'm giving them data and I'm creating a plan of attack for them, saying, hey, call this, say this, do that sort of thing, just know that we're doing it together, right? This isn't
Hmm.
Adam doing this for the first time. This is Adam and Mike, his partner, Mike, who has experience doing these sorts of things. And so the issue that we always had building a team is consistency. first and foremost. It's if I tell you to call 30 people a day, can I really get you to call 30 people a day? Are you going to do that? Um, and then, I think that anytime you bring people in, especially from the SubTo community, because I think that naturally people who join SubTo are wannabe business owners, right? We didn't join SubTo so that we could be an employee for somebody else, right? I mean,
Hmm.
most of the time there are those rare people, but for the most part, anyone who's interested in joining SubTo is eventually going to want to be a business owner. And so what we had a lot of the time were people who thought that they were ready to go out on their own. Some of them were ready, some of them weren't, but they're always jumping the gun a little bit too early for the most part. Meaning maybe they didn't have funding for earnest money, for example. Or maybe, we were supplying all of the data, we were supplying the CRMs, the calling, all of those sorts of systems we were supplying. That doesn't cost a lot of money, but it costs money, right? So, are you prepared for those sort of costs? And so I think that anyone who genuinely wants to learn is going to learn the best underneath someone who is doing it consistently and who's doing it at a level that they aspire to be doing it at in the future. So do deals with those people first, join them, be an employee. Who cares how much you make on a deal? Even if you're not taking the majority of it, trust me, it's not life-changing money. But the what I would say with building a team is there are probably two or three primary components that you're going to want to have in place that you can look for outside of our community. One of them is a title company. I mean, you can absolutely use Creative Title. I would encourage everyone to use
Hmm.
Creative Title. But if you can't use Creative Title and you're doing deals in one specific state, for example, or region, you know, find out who is doing deals that are creative and don't send a deal to a title company who has never done a creative deal to help you close it. It's never gone well. I've never seen it go well. So find
Mm.
two or three investor friendly title companies in your area who are closing transactions specifically subject to. What I will say is if I call up a title company and if I ask the receptionist or whoever picks up the phone, hey, do you guys do subject to? And you kind of hear them go, hey, Jimmy, do we do subject to? They don't. Hang up the phone, call the next one.
Yeah,
Okay.
run.
Doesn't work. Doesn't work. So, get recommendations from the community. Find a title company that is reputable and does deals in your area, does creative deals in your area. The second one is transaction coordination. Super, super key. Use a top tier TC. Use someone from Sub2. So I guess you could use our community for that. Absolutely. Um, in fact, I encourage you to. I'm going to backtrack. Use someone from our community for TC because the coordination of these deals is so much more complex than a standard transaction. It's silly. Silly. I mean, the things that you need to close on or to close with, for example, power of attorney, powers of attorney. You need to have all of those in place before you close or at closing. There's so many times that you need to access the portal of the bank that you're taking over the mortgage for. And if you don't have the documentation, it's going to postpone it by months. It's going to make it really, really difficult to get access and make payments, for example. So build a team around a transaction coordinator and a title company. And the rest you can kind of figure out as you go. Those are the two most important people. Probably an attorney as well, just in case. Um, but yeah, I think those are probably the two and a half departments people that I would have on my team right away.
Yeah, Robert mentioned in this in the chat, he said that that was one of his fears was sounding uneducated, and that's one of the reasons it took him a while to kind of get started, but he's on it now, and he is structuring and closing, helping get his goal ready for 2025.
So, closing's one thing. I think people overcomplicate the underwriting of a creative deal. What I would do is set my criteria really strict. What I mean by that is I only want to look at deals 4.5% interest or less. with 9% entry, for example, in this specific market up to this purchase price. I would be very specific with my buy box, and anything that doesn't fit that, don't try to make it work. It just doesn't work. Um, when I'm underwriting a creative deal, for example, if I'm trying to calculate my entry fee, I do direct agent, so I'm always paying an agent's commission. So I always calculate 3% to the listing agent. I don't need someone to represent me on the buy side. Sometimes the agent will say, "Well, you need to be represented." No, I don't. Trust me, I've done more of these than you have. I promise you. And it's better this way. It just overcomplicates things. The more brokers, agents, um, legal counsel is involved, the more complicated it can be. So remove that as much as possible. But at that point, all we're really doing is we're pulling data that we know is low equity, in my case, at least, right? And so if I'm pulling 15% or less equity, I'm never going to be giving someone more than 6 to 8% cash at close, just the way that the numbers work. I'm going to be paying the agent's commission. I'll be paying the closing costs. The rest is equity that I will be paying to the seller. Um, I wouldn't get involved too heavily into hybrid deals just because negotiating a seller finance portion of these can be complicated, especially when you get into the question of, well, what are you going to be doing with the money? Usually that's a question that can throw people off sometimes as an offensive one. It's not meant to be. But in situations like, so I live in Texas, Robert, you do too. Um, Deals here in Texas are really, really hard to cash flow. Really, really hard. And it's because of our taxes, right? And so, if we're taking a look at a deal with equity, like a hybrid opportunity, where let's say it's a 30% equity deal, if we have to provide a 20% seller finance note, unless it's no payments, then it's going to be really, really hard to underwrite correctly. So kind of know that going into it, that if you have a seller finance piece to it, it is going to be complicated to underwrite in a way that's beneficial for the end buyer. It may make sense for a homestead buyer, but also know your exit strategy so you know going into it that if I'm pulling data for a wholesale, for example, I still need room to include my assignment fee in there. Because what's the point of doing it if I don't have that room? So, you know, for wholesaling creative deals, keep your assignment fees reasonable. And if you can keep your entry fee to 10% or less, that's a good benchmark.
Yeah, and so kind of going back to that team, it sounds like, we were talking off recording about NOLB, no one left behind, which is the new iteration. Before it was zero to hero, then it was elephant. Now we're on this. And I think, like you're saying, the community's heard what you're saying. And those are now leadership positions on those teams. Like you have a transaction coordinator, an operator, you've got your rainmaker who's bringing your leads and your closers. Um, what advice would you give to those people that are running those teams to kind of help get them get everybody rowing in the right direction?
I think that because we're going to be doing these on a more regular basis, I think it's going to be easier for us to go into them with a structure. And what I mean by that is I think most of the challenges moving forward are going to be using the LOI blaster, which I think is a great tool. But I wouldn't count on only generating leads through the LOI blaster. I would complement that with
Mhm.
calling. And so what I would do is I would set very strict guidelines and say that everyone who joins our team here, we plan or our rainmaker, whatever the titles are, I forget exactly who does what. But the people who are sending out the LOIs are going to send out LOIs daily. They will distribute leads as they come in. But to really dedicate time to lead generation for the newbies is going to be really important. And so if we can say for every hour that you have available in a day, I want you to call 10 people and see if you can generate a lead.
Mhm.
I'm only bringing this up as a way for you to structure these challenges moving forward and to go into them on day one, knowing exactly what everyone's going to be doing. It's really hard the bigger teams you get to keep everyone on the same page. and Slack's not going to help. Even in-person deals or in-person challenges, the idea is that most people do it in person, but in reality, this last time we had 41 people on our team and 4 people showed up in person. So we had a Zoom, we had in person. It was complicated. Um, I would say stick with the role and responsibility that you were designated for, meaning if your job is for lead generation, don't spend time underwriting. Don't spend time pulling lists. Just do this one thing. It's only 1 week. I would also
Mhm.
say to keep your expectations realistic. After 3 or 4 days of working something, the chances of you having something under contract, I would say 50-50 or so. So, if you don't get something under contract, it's not your fault. It's not your leadership's fault. Things happen. You need more time to build rapport and trust, especially with direct agent deals. So I would say set realistic expectations and have a really well defined structure on who's doing what and when. And don't call me after 9 p.m.
Yeah, very good point that like you said we made just before the recording is setting boundaries, expectations, guidelines even of like, be respectful of other people and their time. You know, you don't need phone calls at 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't need them at 9 o'clock at night. Um, whatever it is, I'm sure it can wait.
It'll wait. I had this one person who joined our team from the Elephant Challenge, and this person he was gung ho. He was a mover and a shaker, and he was going to find his own deals. And he found this deal close to him. It was a large development deal. I think the asking price on it was like 18 million, 19 million bucks for plot of land. It had plans, the whole thing. It was entitled, zoned correctly, the whole thing. But it'd been on the market for 933 days. Now it was probably over 1,000, but I call it 900 days for the sake of example. He called me on a Friday, and this was at 6 o'clock on a Friday. I remembered very vividly. I was outside with my kids jumping on a trampoline. Hey, we got to talk, Mike. There was a text. We got to talk. I called him. I was like, "Are you okay? What's wrong?" Hey, we got to put this offer in on this deal. Have to, have to, have to. It's not going to last. I go, okay, well, let me take a look at it. Hey, this has been on the market for 900 plus days. I think we can wait until Monday. I think we'll be okay. I don't think it's going to close before then. And, you know, I think naturally people who join these sort of challenges, they go, I need to get a deal. I need to get a deal. I don't care if I make 20 bucks or 20,000 bucks. I need to get a deal. And we're just going to make something work. Now, it goes back to something we talked about before. You never want to try to make something work, right? It's sort of like um, I can imagine that back in my single days, I I didn't date a lot. I dated some, but I think that some of the girls that I went out with could have made great spouses. However, they weren't the right one. When I met my wife, I knew she was the right one. But would I want to settle and say, hey, this person isn't completely right for me? Let's see how it goes. I wouldn't want to do that with my marriage, my relationships, or my real estate deals. And so trying to make something work in real estate doesn't really work. In fact, every time I've done that, things have not gone well at all. So luckily, I learned that decades ago. Um, but I think with these challenges, I can going into them with a realistic expectation of, hey, if at the very least I just learn, then I've come away with more than what I entered it with, and that should be good.
Yeah, and like you're saying, timing is important too as to whether you can make it work or not. Like to your point, my girlfriend and I met 4 years ago. I was not ready 4 years ago. Guess what? We're
Were
together
you
now.
emotionally unavailable? I love that phrase.
Uh,
Sorry.
I don't know if I would call it that. I was definitely still hurt from a previous relationship, and I just hadn't really gotten over it, and was dealing with my own levels of cynicism in a way, I guess, jadedness, and I just decided to go off and do my own thing, and lo and behold, she came back around, and here we are.
Yeah, look, it's kind of like what we talked about earlier with these deals. If I can push away the opportunity and just say, look, I'm here. If you have any questions, if you want to run anything by me, I'm here. That tends to work a whole lot better than it does if I'm calling the agent every single day and saying, hey, where are we at? Will you do this deal? Let me tell you more about creative finance. It never works, ever.
No.
People learn when they want to learn, and you can never force anyone into anything in this business. And it's much better if you don't.
It looks like Patrick's got a good one for you, Mike. He says, how do you overcome the attorney objections to seller financing? Had an on-market deal. Owners were all on board for seller financing was 50% down. After quote unquote speaking to their attorney, they advised that this time in their life is not wise to seller finance. Any tips on getting it close any tips on getting it to close or figure out a different way to structure present the deal? This property has been on market for over 400 days.
Yeah, I think we have to figure out why the agent, or sorry, why the lawyer is against their seller financing it. So lots of questions there. Um, it's very rare for me to find a situation where seller financing will not benefit a seller. And again, we can structure it 1,000 different ways, right? This can be a very short-term seller finance. It can be a really long-term seller finance. It can be 0% interest or 1,000% interest. That's an extreme example, obviously. But I've never found a situation that wouldn't benefit from seller finance if structured correctly. So I would just have more questions. Patrick, I thought I saw you unmute your microphone there. Do you have another follow up?
No, I think that's pretty much it. Honestly, they're honestly in no rush to sell. They're 78 and 76 years old. They got a taste of COVID and they wound up shutting their property down. And they just want to enjoy time. Like they're just, and the listing agent is actually their niece. So I don't think they're in any rush. They were actually very excited when we went to tour the property. And they're the ones that actually brought up the seller financing. We didn't even bring it up to them. They're like, listen, we'll accept seller financing. If you brought 50% down, we can talk more about that. I'm like, that's easy to do. I mean, there's multiple ways to structure that. PMPs, PMLs, Morby method. There's multiple ways to skin that goat. Um, and then time went by because they were traveling. So I got back in touch with them. And then all of a sudden was like, oh, well, they had to talk to the attorney. And then like 3 weeks went by and just continuing to follow up. They're like, well, the attorney kind of advised them about, they against seller financing this time in their lives. I'm like, really? Why? So it's kind of stalled. They're still, they'll still listen to ideas, I believe.
Yeah. So, without any further information from the attorney, we have to play the guessing game. If an attorney says that the sellers aren't at a stage in life where it would benefit them, my assumption is that the attorney thinks that they would be better off with a lump sum of cash as opposed to payments over time. Now, realistically, it all depends on what those sellers are going to do with the money, right? If they don't have to sell it, then it sounds like they don't need the money right now. It's not going to change their lifestyle if they were to sell it, for example. The the other thing too is that depending on what they've done with the property, what it's been used for, how long they've owned it for, you can always pitch the tax advantages way or tax advantages benefits with a sale on seller finance as opposed to a traditional sale, cash sale, whatever that is. If it's a rental property and they are going to cash out, they are going to be paying taxes on that, right? So at the end of the day, if their estate plan is to make sure that their heirs, whoever those people are going to be getting either a lump sum or payments, it doesn't really matter, right? They're going to get the same amount. In fact, they're probably going to get more if they do some form of a seller finance over time. But I would just dig deeper. My guess is also that attorney isn't a real estate attorney. My guess is that is like a personal attorney of some sort. Um, I run into a lot of situations where the sellers say that they've run the contract by an attorney, and that attorney is family law attorney, for example. And just because they're an attorney, they feel like they're qualified to read a real estate contract. When in reality, I probably wouldn't. I'd rather go to a real estate attorney, for example. So lots of questions there, but I would dig a little bit deeper, see what they need the money for, and if you get the sense that they don't need the lump sum of cash now to pay off something or to go buy a boat or whatever it is, I would continue on with the seller finance piece. I also would never pay 50% down on a seller finance. That scares the crap out of me. Um, so, lean into a little bit of discomfort here. They're going to continue to wait to sell until they feel like they're presented with the best offer, and maybe, hopefully, you are the best offer at some point.
Cool.
And also, Patrick, to Mike's point, like oftentimes the third party expert in a sales negotiation like this is usually less than qualified, if qualified at all. Like the attorney could just be a family friend that reads contracts for a living. They could be a paralegal. They might not even be in law at all, you know, much less if they're a medical malfeasance attorney versus a real estate attorney or a tax attorney or whatever. Um, the RV park that we were negotiating, we had something really similar happen. The attorney looked over the purchase agreement and was like, well, we're not going to commit to it without this these two clauses being changed. One of them was he wanted a deposit, but Louisiana is a no deposit state, so we didn't have it in there. We were like, we can make a deposit if that would, progress the transaction. And then the other one was a mutual performance clause, which is recommended by the Real Estate Association of Louisiana. And if you're a real estate attorney, you would know that because they recommend that you put it in all of your contracts. In fact, that clause came straight out of a contract from their website. And he said that he didn't want the penalty to be 10% on either side. He wanted it to be $10,000 total. Um, so similarly, again, if you're a real estate attorney, like A, how did you not know that clause existed? And B, why are you trying to lower the potential penalty, which is only applicable if you as the seller cannot perform?
I think that there are these service providers out there like attorneys or um, some form of consultants, for example, where their responsibility should really be to protect the best interest of their clients. And I've gotten into situations where I feel like the sellers aren't getting the best representation, not just because they're going against what I think they should do, but rather, if I'm looking for someone to manage my money, do I want to go to a wealth manager or do I want to go to a general contractor, for example? The same goes for attorneys. To your point, Adam, if I want something done in real estate, I don't want to go to um, a personal injury attorney. I want to go to a real estate attorney. So, I always want to make sure that I'm also providing some sort of referral if needed. Hey, just out of curiosity, what type of attorney is the attorney that you're speaking with? Oh, they're a non-real estate attorney. Okay, cool. Well, there are plenty of attorneys here that I can refer you to. They've not represented me. I am not a client of theirs, but feel free to call them and I'm happy to pay for the time that you have with that person. That's one thing I've done a lot of in the past is paid for people's consultation time or attorney's fees, whatever that is, just for them to get a second opinion from someone who isn't me, who's not representing me, but is hopefully representing their best interest.
I think that's a really good idea. I wouldn't have thought about paying for the consultation for the other person, but to your point of like leading with value and really making sure that, not only you, but the fiduciary in this position, whether that be an attorney or in the example you use as a wealth manager, is protecting, that seller.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of different ways that we can help people. And some of them some of them are going to have ulterior motives. For example, there are people who are targeting foreclosures. A lot of people now who are targeting foreclosures. If you're doing it right, what you're doing is you're leading with, "Hey, how can I help you keep your home, or how can I help you accomplish what your goal is with the house?" Usually it's keep the home. That's why I said that. But it's easy to see through a lot of people who go, "Sure, let me see if I can help you save the home. By the way, here's my cash price for your house." You know, Realistically,
Mm.
they want to buy it themselves. And so I think that we always win. I'm a big believer in karma. And so if we can put more good out there, even if, for example, that seller that I've paid for an attorney's consultation for doesn't do business with me, I've put that out there into the universe and said, look, I want to help more people. I'm not just doing it for myself. If they ultimately decide that this isn't best for them, no problem. I'm out $500. Not the end of the world. But I think that at some point, something good is going to happen as a result of me doing that good deed. That's kind of the way that I look at it.
And that was the point I was going to make to that, to what you just said too, is that, a consultation can't possibly be that expensive. Maybe you're out a few $100. Like you said, $500 is probably pretty standard, but you protected somebody, you know, even though you didn't know.
Yeah, exactly. Put more good out there, good things will happen.
I did also want to make a point, kind of pivoting back towards the NOLB teams. Robert said that he's a Rainmaker operator and a coach for this month. But it sounds like that would be kind of to the point you were making earlier, like maybe even almost doing a little bit too much.
Robert, is that out of necessity or
Yeah, it was out of necessity. When the team first was formed, our Rainmaker dropped out first day. It took support about 4 days to get us another Rainmaker. In that amount of time, I'd reached out to every team member. Only a handful, of course, responded. Um, one of our closers that was on our list was literally 3 days into SubTo. So not a closer. One of our closers is MIA, can't find him. The other one that was listed was he's an investor, but he's never closed a SubTo deal. So I know I have no confidence in him carrying that torch. Our operator TC, MIA, finally heard from her. I guess Friday was the first time I heard from her and stuff. And so, as of Monday, I bought the LOI blaster. I'm running the daily Zooms. I'm, helping people with their calls. I'm helping talk to agents on behalf of, the team and everything and stuff. So, I've kind of taken it all on. My issue is, when I was looking for closers and stuff and everything, I'm good friends with Andrew, SubTo Drew, and stuff. So I reached out to him, and he's kind of, you know, I love him to death, but he's really hard to communicate with. He's hard to get a hold of. He's, and stuff, and rightfully so. He's very picky. He said, email me the deals. I'll send them to the underwriter. They'll tell me yes or no. So I've done that, but I haven't heard back on anything. I don't know if those deals are moving. I'm still lost in it. I don't know what to do with them, right? So I don't know what to do with the deals. Like we've got 4 or 5 that need to either go to a closer or I need to call them and do something like tomorrow. And I don't know where to go with them.
okay? So
I'm great talking with the agents. I understand, I've studied this I've been in SubTo almost 2 years and haven't done a deal because I wanted to make damn sure that I understand and can answer as many questions as possible without looking like an idiot.
yeah, so Adam, how would you be okay with us kind of going through this deal or deals?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, um, in total fairness to any of the leaders who are managing people in these challenges and also running their own businesses, what I will tell you from my personal experience is that if there's no news, it means that there's no good news. You know what I
Right.
mean? And I was looking at my text messages today, my Facebook Messenger text messages, and there are people in there who I've communicated with very briefly, never really spoken on the phone, but multiple messages today, for example, that said, I need to hop on the phone with you today. When do you have time? Now, mind you, today's Sunday. I kind of look at my Sunday as family day.
Right.
I do a little bit of work, obviously, here, but you know, Sunday we had my daughter's birthday today, for example, and so if I don't get back to you, it's not because I don't like you. It's not because I can't help you. It's because either there's nothing really there right now for me to spend time on, or I'm just busy doing other things. Um, but let's talk about the deal that you kind of have in place right now, and let's just kind of put three or four more sets of eyes on this and see if we can make sense.
Okay. Um,
Robert, one of the questions I did want to ask you too is how many other teams do you have in your area? Because it may just be worthwhile for you to just combine more than one team. If you only have like say three, four, five people on yours currently. In Louisiana, we only had three teams, and we had so many people drop out between the first two teams that merged. Five Rainmakers were assigned, and none of them showed up.
yeah,
So we merged all three teams to make one full team.
yeah. I mean, let's see. I have actively the freshmen or whatever they're called. One, two, three, four, five, six. I have six that are actively doing things. They're actively calling agents. We're getting very few responses back from the agents. And I think part of that is that they are getting overwhelmed with so many emails, so many everythings from the challenge and elsewhere and stuff. But we get very few responses back. But with the team, they've been assigned all the different, we broke the list down of all the leads and assigned a certain amount to each one, and they're going through the list and calling and stuff. So we are getting leads that way.
You have more freshmen than we do.
Yeah, so there's six freshmen that are actively working. A couple of them, well, most of them are busting their butts. They really are and stuff. They're doing really good. Um, but I'm
I
trying
was
to
gonna say if
find.
you got your deals pulled up, you could walk them right. We could walk right through them with Mike.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking. I'm looking at my notes. So, um, probably I wanted to find this one, and for some reason it's not on my list, and I don't remember where it was. There's one in Georgetown that I really wanted you to look at. Give me a second, and I'll find it.
Yeah, no worries.
Mike, what was the biggest team you ever ran when you were doing Elephant? Just out of curiosity.
That's really hard to answer, but I would say that we we probably had 300 or so baby elephants that we were providing data to and then training 3 days a week. There were a lot.
Yeah, because I thought so. I thought the amount of leaders in Elephant was far more limited, so that would have made the teams much larger.
Yeah, I think that there were 6 or 7 teams doing these sorts of things in the Elephant Challenge when it finished. And Don and I and Angie and Dom were the two big groups that were probably doing it the longest amount of time. Carly as well. So yeah, what we found is that there were people who were bouncing around from group to group. They would spend 3 hours with us, 3 hours with Dom and Angie. They'd go to Carly's Zooms, um, which I think is really actually common in SubTo. It's kind of like bouncing around on the Zoom calendar as opposed to
Mm,
actually doing the work. Um, I can't tell you how many Zooms we had where we used to call our Zoom was the Dumbo dial. And the way that we would do it is we would say, okay, guys, here's the data. You guys call. If you get someone on the phone, unmute. Let's listen to your conversation. We'll call calibrate it. Tell you what you did well, what you could improve on, that sort of thing. And we probably had 200 people on Zooms. And for 3 hours, it would be quiet. And you'd imagine that if there were 5 people calling agents, that you'd always have a phone call to listen to. But, people just don't do the work the way that you think that they should. It's
mm.
crazy to me.
Well, I can't find my notes, but I did find the listing on the deal. It was a referral from an agent that we called, and the deal that we called about they wasn't interested, but he did get a one that was. Like I say, it's in Georgetown. It's 611 Ponzano. Um, 3% interest rate. Loan balance is 315. They're asking 425, but I sent the mortgage statement. I have the mortgage statement. Not the right one.
They just reduced the price, by the way, to 414.
So they owe 316, roughly
316.
316.
Okay.
And
So
I
tell
talked
me,
to the agent. The agent was very, very curious about creative financing. Said that she felt like that this was going to be a good offer for her clients, and stuff. She understands. She kind of understood SubTo a little bit. I went in and explained more to her and stuff, and yeah, I just need to follow up with her, or somebody needs to follow up with her.
okay, so how would you structure something like that? So it's listed right now at 414. They owe 316. So tell me how you're planning to submit an offer on that.
Well, that's the part with the subject to situation that I don't know.
Is how to structure a hybrid, Robert?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things was that I didn't get was how much equity or how much of the equity does the seller want? Right? And I've got it recorded. I've got my conversation recorded. I could go back and listen to it.
Okay. So
One of my issues with this challenge is that I've talked to so many people, it's hard for me to keep track of who is what, right?
Yep.
So I just record all my calls.
Yep, that's why notes are so important.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's kind of break this down as much as we possibly can. So it's listed right now at 414. It's been on the market for about 45 days. They owe 316. On the face of it, they have about $100,000 in equity.
Right.
But realistically, if they were to sell conventionally right now, would they walk away with $100,000?
No.
Okay. So what costs do we have to consider from a sales standpoint that's going to be taken out of their total net at close?
It's going to be probably around 10%.
Yeah, right. So we have to take into account agents' commissions and closing costs.
Right.
And sometimes repairs and things like that, they're going to pop up in the closing process.
Right.
So I like that round number. So, if we're to structure just a general hybrid or even just a straight seller finance or a straight SubTo, the first thing that I always want to try to calculate is what the net to seller is going to be with a traditional sale. Meaning, if we do take out that 8 to 10%, what do they plan to net at the end of the day?
Right.
And I'm going to base my offer solely on that number as long as the value makes sense. Let's say, for example, that this property is listed at 414, but it's really worth 350. I don't want to offer 414. I might be able to offer a little bit more than 350, but definitely not 75,000 bucks or 70,000 bucks more than what the value is, right? I'm not stupid. I'm flexible, not stupid.
Right.
So in this case, let's take out 40,000 bucks. Okay, about 10%. It's probably closer to 9%. We're gonna be left with 374. Okay, so if they owe 316, what that means is they're really gonna net, what is that? 58,000 bucks. That's their net at the end of the day. So when I'm structuring a SubTo deal, whether it's a hybrid deal or a straight SubTo or even a straight seller finance, I don't usually want to give more than $5,000 to $10,000 to the seller. The most I've ever given to the seller is 15,000 bucks, and that was really stretching it. That was about a $500,000 house. So the way that I would do it is say, Mr. and Mrs. Agent, if I can give you a down payment of 5,000 to 10,000 bucks, the seller's still going to have some equity. First of all, I'd ask, what are they going to do with their equity? But after that conversation has been had, I would say something to the effect of, would the seller be open to financing some of their equity to me? And then just shutting up and seeing what they say. In this situation, it kind of goes back to an example we used before, where if you were to give $5,000 or $10,000 and you were to take over a really good low interest rate loan at 3%, the chances of you cash flowing are still probably pretty small. And so you're really going to have to take that $50,000 to $60,000 in seller finance and negotiate it to a point that makes sense for you. And I always position myself as, look, and Pace does this so much better than anybody else. And I almost feel bad trying to sound like him, but it's basically, look, in a situation like this, I would be buying this, or my partners would be buying this as a rental. So realistically, I don't want to go in there and offer you something, structure a deal that might make sense for you, but doesn't make sense for me, meaning that maybe I'm having to pay $500 a month out of pocket. If my rent, for example, is getting $500 less than what my PITI payment is. So in a perfect world, if I could break even, if I could even make $100, that's even better. So is there a way for me to structure this with you guys so that the sellers get their equity, I pay you your commission, I pay all the closing costs, I'm able to maximize their equity because I do those sorts of things. I will give you 5,000 or 10,000 bucks, but what can we do about that remaining equity position so that I'm not having to come out of pocket with a considerable amount of money every single month? Let's say that the rent on this is 3,000 bucks. How can we structure it so that my payment all in is close to 2,800 bucks to 3,000 bucks? Put the ball back in their court.
Right.
And, maybe that's 0% interest principal only payments. Maybe that's no payments for the first 5 years. Maybe that's something else, but you need to have that conversation. That's really important so that you can structure that in a way that makes sense for everybody.
Right. I guess another place that I'm kind of stuck when I start seeing these PITIs up at, $2,400 like this one is, I don't know. It's mind boggling to me because I don't, I can only go off of down here where I'm at. I mean, a $3,000 a month rent is just, it's unheard of. Right.
Yep.
And stuff. So, even when I'm, running rental comps, which is hard to do sometimes and stuff, or hard to get a really good, accurate number and stuff. I mean, even if it wasn't the seller financing portion of the equity or any of that kind of stuff and everything, if rental comps come back in at like 25, 20, say they come in at 2,600, the PITI is 2,400. Do you ever add anything to that? Because once it's taken over, taxes are gonna come out of homestead and go way up. Insurance is gonna go up. I always add, 10 to 15% on top of the PITI because I know it's gonna go up.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're exactly right. That's one thing that I'm glad you said that I was going to say that a lot of people miss. When
Yeah,
they buy a property that has a homestead exemption, but they plan to use it for an investment property, the taxes are going to go up about 25 total percent.
yeah,
And of course, insurance is going to change a little bit. You're going to get a different policy there. So the price is actually going to go up. You're exactly right. I'm glad you said that. I would just use that to your advantage. This is the conversation that you have to have. And I think where you're going to excel, Robert, because I think that you come off very authentic, very genuine. I don't see a whole lot that you're holding back. I'm not wondering, what is he not telling me, for example? I think if you just come out and say, look, I'm really interested in this. I think that the value's right there, for example. But for me, the way that I need to structure something like this for it to make sense is X, Y, and Z.
right.
What do you think the property would rent for, Mr. and Mrs. Agent? And then base your conversation totally off that.
Okay,
I think that you've built up enough rapport where you can have this conversation. You say, I'm going to shoot you straight. This is the way that I'm looking at it. Does it make sense for us to continue the conversation here?
right.
And then just put the ball back in their court.
Okay,
If they want it bad enough, they'll work with you.
right. Okay. That's some good
And to his point,
advice.
if they don't, they won't.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, I am on my, I've called enough agents. I've had my butt chewed out so many times it's not even funny, and stuff. None of that bothers me anymore. I don't even care, you know. Um, I told an agent that I loved her the other day just because she was a unicorn, you know. Um, had some really, really good conversations. Um, Even with some agents that didn't understand it and stuff. Uh, having the conversations isn't the issue. I've bought some properties, but I have personally never wholesaled a deal. So figuring out how to structure it to wholesale it has been a challenge, and I think it's more of a challenge in my head, right? Um, but like you said earlier, I just need somebody to walk through a couple of them with me and stuff. And
Here's how you fix it, Robert. This is a really, really easy way to fix it.
okay,
Find the buyer first.
right,
Now, a year ago, 2 years ago, I wouldn't have told you to do that. But now, because it's so important that you sell to people who are responsible and you
right,
sell deals that make sense, it's so much better to find the buyer now and then run the deal by them. I would first check to make sure that they've done these sorts of transactions before. Have you acquired part of your real estate portfolio through subject to transactions? Okay, cool. Let me see which ones you've done. Let's make sure they're successful. Vet them out, make sure they have money to pay for the deals and all that sort of thing. And then when you have them vetted, then you bring them this deal and say, hey, how would you structure something like this? Because what you're doing there is you're basically negotiating with the seller and the person who's going to buy it without either one of them really knowing it. I mean, sure, the buyer is going to be aware of what's going on, but they're going to tell you what's a deal for them.
right,
And that way you can go back to the agent and say, this is a deal for us with the terms that I have specified right here. Entry fee is this. This is what we can do about the seller finance portion to it. You're speaking from a place of, actual fact as opposed to
right,
hypotheticals. Hey, if I could do this, that's not going to work here. What is going to work here is, hey, my partner's willing to buy this for X, Y, and Z. Is that some of your sellers willing to consider?
right.
So
Perfect.
I would just find the buyers first in this situation.
Okay. So you're actively
And
buying
also,
your buy box.
Yeah, look, this
No, I mean,
this doesn't fit my buy box.
no, this one, I know this one probably doesn't, but
I mean, look, it's actually not too far off though. This is in my neighborhood, sort of. It's probably 45 minutes away from me, maybe an hour. I don't personally like this deal because I don't think that we can structure enough with the equity for it to make sense. If I were to get no payments for 5 years, done. Great deal.
Right.
But in
Or
reality, that's probably
they,
not the
or
case.
if they were in a situation where they just wanted away from it and didn't even care about the equity.
Yeah, that's not reality though. They're gonna
It's
need to
not,
they're
but
gonna want that.
I do have one like that, that they don't have a whole lot of equity, but we've ran into a couple of divorce situations.
Hmm.
They just want to wipe their hands of it. They don't care. They don't want to make any money. They just get me out of this,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
happens all
situation.
the time.
It does happen. It's just, I don't know. I don't remember if this one is, I don't remember what the situation was. I got to go back and listen to my deal, um, but yeah. And like I said, one of those deals, and since you're up in that area, I found this one deal. It's a divorce situation in Holland. I don't know if you know where that is.
I don't. Where's
It's,
Holland?
it's east of, it's east of 35, just below Belton.
Ooh, I hate Belton.
It's just a tiny little community to the east, right? And it's tiny.
Yep, I would stay away from it.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Too small.
Too small.
Hmm.
And, I the whole deal doesn't make sense to me. I mean, they're willing to walk away for nothing, but they owe 203 on a house that might be worth 220.
Well, I mean, that's
But
actually
the rents are
perfectly fine.
1,400 and their payments are 1,600.
Here's what I would do in that situation. I would see if you can get an option on that and then see if you can find a homestead buyer for it. That's not going to be a deal that I would ever want to get under contract and risk an EMD, for example,
Right.
or a closing period that's 30 days out. But I would say something like, let's potentially consider doing an option where I go out and help you find a buyer for it, where they simply take over the payments on the mortgage. Then what you do is you negotiate just your entry fee to it. You charge a little bit more to your end buyer. Um, but you need to give yourself enough time to find that end buyer, and it's not 30 days. It's probably closer to 90 days on that. But
Okay.
yeah, some of the smaller stuff, like I did a deal in Paris, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
I will never do a deal in such a small city ever again. And Holland looks like it's even smaller than Paris.
Yep.
So, tread lightly with the smaller areas.
Yeah.
You might be able to find a buyer, but you just don't want to put yourself in a corner.
Right. Right. I get it.
Well, good luck with
And
that deal.
Robert, to reiterate a point with NOLB, I would start to build your team. Take some of that stuff off your plate. That's a lot.
Yeah.
I'm just an operator, and it is a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot, but I have an assistant working for me now and stuff. So he's running the blaster and stuff. We do have another lady that um like I say, support did assign us another rainmaker. She came in and said, I don't want anything from these deals, but I'll help y'all send leads and stuff. So they're working together, sending everything out and everything and stuff. So basically all I'm doing is helping the newbies with their calls and all that kind of stuff and running the Zooms and just kind of keeping everything coordinated and stuff. So
Yeah, and I talked to Emma. She said use TC Squad. But yeah. So anyway,
yeah, she
I
reached
hope
out to me.
I hope that helps, brother.
Yeah, Emma reached out to me and I've got her on the list as a TC. So
Beautiful,
What's Emma's last name?
Duncan.
Duncan.
100%.
Emily.
Emma and we stayed in an Airbnb last weekend. She is badass. Love that girl. So,
Yeah, she was supposed to be coming on to come watch you, and I guess
oh,
she got tied up with her house tour. But Emma was my first podcast guest, and who pushed me to do all this.
she's badass. Love her.
She is. She's one of the best. And obviously, Mike, like you said, we're getting to the top of the hour here. We'll tidy this up. I guess my final questions would kind of be along the lines of like, A, if you have anything that you want to plug, like where people can reach out to you, this is the time and place to do it. But also B, what is the advice that you would leave to new investors or to people on the challenges?
That's really good segue. If you guys want to reach out to me, my Instagram handle is probably the easiest way to reach out to me, at Mike Jackson SubTo. DM me. And I think that the best advice I can give to someone who wants to either accelerate their business or just get their business off the ground, do their first deal, do maybe their first 5 deals, something like that, is partner up. This community is one that's rare in the sense that people are willing to help. And that's a rarity in real estate mentorships, communities. It's not the same way in the other ones. It's competition. Here, it's collaboration. So find people that you can work with and who have time available. Reach out to me if you want me to run anything. If you want me to take a look at anything, run some comps, do some underwriting. I can do it really quickly, just because I've done a lot of those sorts of things, and other people have the same level of experience, if not more, and can do it faster. So, pair up with people, find your community, find people who are, maybe not Warren Buffett to me, in the sense that we're so far away from each other from a skills standpoint and from a status standpoint. Find someone who is a step or two ahead of you, and then continue to level up to that point. So build your team, level up, JV with people. Don't be afraid of splitting profit on a deal. Just get deals under your belt and learn as you go. So that's the best advice I can provide.
Beautiful, man. I love it. Guys, y'all know how we do. We've had a great time. I've definitely enjoyed having Mike on. We do these every single Sunday live from 4 to 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. Link is always on the timeline in my story. So if you feel the need to, or if you feel like you want to join us for a guest, come on. And the only thing we ask is if we made you think, if we made you laugh, we brought you value. If what you got here was worth sharing, that you share it and you tell a guest, and y'all come back. So until then, we will see everybody next week.
Thank
All
you
right.
guys. Thanks, Adam.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.